It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Terry Shepard. Hey, Terry, how are you?
Hey, listen, I understand that birthday wishes are in order, young man. You survived another trip around the sun.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you. This one isn't the big one, though. Next year's going to be the big one. This year I'm 59, so, that doesn't sound so interesting as 60, does it?
Well, it all depends. I mean, I'm Route 66 this year. My magic number, and I don't even remember what 60 felt like. I think it was 40 was the one where I started to feel like maybe I needed some WD-40 on a few joints, and I had to stop running.
It's funny you say that because, I had a major midlife crisis at 40. I mean, huge, to the point where at 43, I quit my job. I moved from Boston, where I'm originally from, to Las Vegas, and then I just sort of set up camp in Las Vegas and then took off, and I lived in Thailand for 3 years, teaching English and writing music, catching up to all the songs that I didn't write while I was working 20 years in a corporate job. I got married, and everything happened basically in that 3-year period. When I turned 50, it was like the best party I've ever had.
Yeah.
Because I was happy. I was doing what I wanted to do. I was out of the rat race finally. And, people were like having all these traumas about their 50th birthday. And I said, mine was the best birthday I ever had. So we'll see. Today is going to be uneventful, and we'll see what next year. I'm planning already for 60, so we'll see.
Well, for me, the big change in my life was 65, because that's when I decided that I was going to be a writer. I had followed the corporate path for, started working in broadcasting at age 14 and had many corporate iterations along the way. But finally at 65, I found myself here in Jacksonville, Florida, where our kids and grandkids live, and without anything to do. I mean, I'd done well enough at work that I didn't need to worry about, where the next paycheck was coming from. Like all of us broadcasters did back in the day,
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to do, and thank goodness for a great psychiatrist who said, well, you were always asking people, what would you do if you're working for love and not for money? And why don't you answer that question? And it ended up being writing. And I'm so glad that I discovered it, because it's been a wonderful ride.
Well, that's great. And actually, your bio says that you wrote your first short story at 11, so you had some practice along the way, yeah?
Yeah, well, I've always been kind of a writer, but you're afraid to throw it all there, especially if the main thing you've been writing about most of your life is nonfiction stuff. And for me to enter this world that I really didn't know that much about, and to try and do it from scratch was a little bit of a leap of faith. I don't know if this is the way that you've looked at the many things that you've done, but I always kind of go into everything new with the assumption that I'm going to have some modicum of success, and also the assumption that the people who are already good at this will not throw me out the front door if I ask them for advice. And that's been my experience in writing, that there is so much demand for really good fiction out there and not nearly enough supply, that there's not really any competition. So we're all in this together as one family in the craft, and I've had wonderful coaching and support from names big and small, names you'd know, names you wouldn't. That's been the kind of the fun part. And I imagine you probably feel this way in your music iteration, because I remember when I was in that space, it's a very, very small family. It really is.
Well, yes and no. Yeah. The problem with music has been the internet. And what happened was I was pursuing music when I was 18, long before the internet, doing it the old-fashioned way, just playing in clubs in New York City and writing songs, trying to get a record label interested. And then I bowed out of the scene and went and did my 20-year serving time. I mean, it almost sounds like a prison sentence, but in a sense it was. It was a mental prison sentence. I wrote 2 songs in the entire 20 years that I was working in corporate. And then when I got out and went to Thailand, I wrote 25 songs in 3 years. So there was a lot of backup there. There was a big log jam. Anyways, when I got back to music, though, the whole industry had been turned upside down by the internet and with digital. Yep. So I had to learn it all over again. And learning it at 43 years old, it wasn't that difficult, but it just was something completely new that the kids, the ones that were 18, well, at that point when I was 43, they already had it down. So I had a lot of catching up to do. And, I realized at that point there was no way I'm going to go back to being a live performer. I said, not at my age. That's just crazy, So I'm going to be a studio musician and just create. And that was the good side of the technology, was that you could set up a home studio. Back in the day when we were doing this when I was 18, a home studio would cost around $50,000. We knew one guy that had one in his basement of his house, and he paid more for the studio than he did for the house at that time. He had a little three-bedroom house. Yeah, he had a little 3-bedroom house way out on Long Island, and he was a tech geek in those days, and so he spent the money and set up an 8-track recording studio, very professional, 2-inch reel-to-reel Ampex setup, and it was beautiful. And it was the first time I'd ever been into any kind of a proper studio, and I was awestruck. Well, now that same studio you can buy for about $200, and it's about the size of a shoebox, if that. It may be the size of like a DVD cover. And that's all you need. That, a good microphone, and a computer. Editing is you still got to know what you're doing, but and mixing. But it's just amazing. So the problem, the good side of it is the same as the bad side with music, is that it's very easy to make music at home and put it out, and the bad side is it's really easy for everybody to make music at home and put it out. So the market is so saturated, it's unbelievable.
I mean, that's the parallel world, I think, with publishing. It's now so accessible that you can create, but the content is still king, right? I mean, you got to have the chops to create music that people want, and it's the same way with writing. Your content's got to be good, or else it's just another thing on Amazon that somebody sees but won't buy.
I would agree with you more on writing, and I've had a lot of authors on this show, and I try to make the parallel between the music industry and the writing. I don't think that technology has upset the writer's world quite as severely as it has to the music industry, because basically you're not really doing anything different. You still got to sit down and write. You can write on a computer now instead of on a typewriter, I suppose. The publishing, the self-publishing aspects, I don't know. What is your take on that? Because it's hit or miss for people that I talk to. They said, well, there's good and bad on both sides with traditional publishing or self-publishing, but one isn't necessarily any better than the other, according to a lot of people that I've spoke to. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of it is where your comfort zone is. When I think about the parallel to music, you look at a guy like Bones Howe. I sometimes wonder what it would be like if he had Pro Tools, access to that. But in the beginning, he was a drummer and an engineer, so he came into production and did all that amazing stuff out in L.A. with the Fifth Dimension and the Association and a dozen other groups in the '60s. But for some people, if you're, and I don't know who would be a good analog for, I do know a lot of writers that are only comfortable with the writing piece. So, and that hasn't changed. I mean, you can still, what you're writing on is a piece of software, and I know a couple of guys still write on the legal pad. They write their stuff there.
Wow.
But where it has changed is that you're now really responsible for your own promotion. Even if you're working for one of the big five, they just don't have the resources that they used to have when there wasn't so much competition to get behind you in marketing. And so even the guys that I know who would be more household names do report that they're finding themselves, they are touring musicians. They have to get out on the road and they have to interact with their fans themselves without necessarily having the handlers or the help that they would have had when they started 20 years ago, before Kindle Direct and all that stuff was happening. For me, I mean, I'm fascinated by every piece, every step of the process. And I chose the independent route on purpose. My sister worked for one of the big five, and I probably could have gotten somebody to take a chance on me there, but you can do things so much faster as an indie. I can get a book written, edited, and published in the space of 90 days if I've got the motivation to create the story. And in the big publishing houses, you're still waiting a long period of time, some cases a year or two. People have books in the pipeline that take that long. And today, I think you got to be more agile. I mean, stories, I can't sell a pandemic story a year from now, but I could now. But I could sell a pandemic story now.
Well, that's true.
And
yeah.
An example is I got into this. I had no intention really of becoming a writer of kids stuff, but my grandkids asked about, how do we protect ourselves from COVID? So I wrote them a Dr. Seuss-esque book that my son-in-law, who's a great graphic artist, illustrated, and that thing's taken off. I mean, it's become a thing because people all want to have something to explain to their children how masking and social distancing works, and are vaccines safe and all of that from a child's perspective. And we all remember green eggs and ham, so when you're doing that in that pentameter, they memorize it. The doctors that have my books in their offices, they say when they get them home, it's the one their kids want to read night after night for a month. They have it all memorized. So if I were going the traditional publishing route, I would have had to wait a year to get that thing out. And I was able to turn that around. The only thing that slowed me up was waiting for my son-in-law to finish his illustrations. That's what took the longest time. So it is different, and you have to have a broader field of view than just content creation, I think, to understand the fact that you really are the brand as the author. Your characters are what you're selling.
Yes.
You wrap them around the stories around them, but you are. They want to know as much about you as they do about the books that you've written for them.
I was just on a panel show as a guest a couple of weeks ago, and this was the topic for an hour and a half, which I don't like talking that long, surprisingly enough. But this topic was so engaging that I got into it. And the topic was merit versus marketing in the digital world today, right? And
yeah.
We had one person on one side of the argument saying that the content was king and that's all that mattered and blah, blah, blah. And I disagreed with him because, I used to think that when I first started in with my music back when I first, when I got out of corporate. And I thought, I'll write some great songs. And okay, well, first of all of my music was like way outdated because everything I was writing was very 70s-esque. And, it just wasn't, people were like, oh, well, this is, great stuff. We'll shove it over here in the classical rock section, And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So, but it is really about marketing because the market is so saturated and there's so much crap, to be honest, out there that you've got to push your good stuff at least above the waterline to get somebody to notice it. And that takes the marketing to do. And it's funny you said that about people that are famous and with traditional publishers. Do you know David Baldacci? Do you know the name?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. He was on the show, And we talked about this off interview. But he said, even with me, and he wasn't being, arrogant about it. He was just saying, I write a book, my publisher will write me a nice big check as an advance because they know that my name will sell, right? He said, but I still got to get out there and do podcasts and TV appearances. They don't set any of that up for him. He's got to do all of that himself because they just don't have the time or the resources or whatever. And, he said that the one thing that was funny about getting to that level of success was that he has to be his own critic. Because I told him, I said, well, they wouldn't come to you, like you send them something, they're not going to go, nah, I don't think so. I don't think we want this one. Because they know that if they put his name on it, and I've also noticed the bigger the author, the bigger the name is, like their name will be up top before before the title of the book. He just laughed and he said, no, they won't turn down anything. He said, but I'm going to feel like a shit if I send them what I think is crap. So he said, thank God I have my wife, who I guess he runs everything through before he submits it to the publisher. And I guess she tells him, if she doesn't like it, he won't submit it or whatever. But it's funny, even somebody at that level of success. And you're right. They still the marketing is, unfortunately, I think that to a certain degree, the content has taken a back seat to marketing just because the market's so saturated.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's if you talk to Bob Iger about why he bought Marvel and Lucasfilm, he didn't buy the films. He bought the characters and the ability to use them to tell the stories his way.
Exactly.
And Dave's, the things that I love about David is that he's not afraid to embrace whatever platform is going to continue to move his brand forward. He's just doing a master class now. And he's good. I mean, it's the taken some of the sessions, and he's very, very good. He's figured it out. They have very good production values, but that is also building his brand and opening him to a broader audience who might not have known his name as that one segment does. And it's the same thing. One of the things I discovered with Chasing Vega, was that there's a great interest in the Jessica Ramirez character in the comic space, in the graphic novel space. I have people that are approaching me saying, we need, I read the book, Jess needs to be a comic book star. And here are some people that are willing to help you work in that direction. And that was a real enlightening thing to me, is to figure out where the platforms are. Because when we think about writing the book, you think, okay, we got the printed version, and then you got the digital version, and then you got the audio book.
Right.
But then what else? What do you do? And in the case of the kids one, the COVID book that I wrote, we've got a coloring book coming out. We had it animated, so it's going to be an animated thing that you can get on whatever platform we end up putting that on. But that's never stuff we had to think about before in our area of specialty. I never thought about, even on the music side, I never thought about, it was all about holding that 45 in your hand. It's like the movie That Thing You Do, when Tom Hanks brings the box of 45s out and says, the greatest moment in every group's life, Nowadays, it's a zillion different things. It's a jump drive, or it can be something completely different. And you have to figure out, and the other thing is, it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
One of the greatest pieces of advice I got was, you don't have to throw the party. You just have to figure out where the party is and be there. So that's what I'm doing now. I mean, this new Clubhouse platform, social media platform, there are a ton of authors and fans and narrators on that platform, and I've joined it and am learning a lot from being there and making a lot of great network connections that didn't exist, 120 days ago. So that kind of agility, bringing that into whatever it is, whatever your work is these days, is just essential.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Well, I've found I've been getting a little bit too overwhelmed, and the problem is that because it's so DIY, like we're just talking about, you have to do it all yourself, or you have to delegate it to somebody else, which means you got to pay somebody else to do whatever it is. And I'm finding that to be a necessary reality for my show, because I just hired a PR person for the next 3 months, and I'm going to be very busy going on other shows as a guest to promote, basically to promote myself, right? Like you said, it's all about the name. And so while I'm doing that, I can't be doing all the social medias and all this other stuff. So I'm going to have to hire somebody to take care of that. You know, John is pretty much full out taking care of emails and things, and he does some of the social media, but he's an old guy like me, so he's not an expert. There are those 20 somethings that really know how to navigate around social media with all the hashtags and with all getting you on all these different lists and in groups and all this kind of stuff. So that's the next project, I think, is it becomes you need to create a corporation around yourself is what happens after a while. Yeah,
exactly. Well, that's what James Patterson is. I mean, he's got people writing his books for him. You know, he'll take on partners. He gets the final look to make sure that it follows, just like Dave Baldacci does. You know, you get the final look on everything, but you do have to do that. And the challenge, I think, especially in the social media space, is when you delegate, you really have to find, it's like hiring a ghostwriter to help you. You have to find somebody that understands your voice and can communicate in that voice.
Right.
Because I look at somebody like Brian Wilson, who he clearly has other people doing it for him because it's all third-person stuff. And in social media, it's a very first-person relationship. And people can smell out those guys. So as you're looking at who you're going to hire and you're thinking about your strategy, if you can maintain the sense that your fans are talking with you, that's what they want. They love Douglas. I mean, there's a reason that you've had the success that you've had in this space, because you're a great communicator and you make great connections with people, and they want more of it, and they want it on all platforms. So what they don't want is they don't want to hear, you know, somebody that's clearly a college kid.
Well, that's true.
Talking their voice and not yours.
And, you know, Douglas has left the building. You know, you don't want that. You don't want that as the auto response every time somebody comes on and says, "Hey, Douglas, how you doing?"
So you gotta watch it. I mean, when I've had to hand that stuff off, I make sure that I get a daily summary from them of the traffic, so I can look at it real quick and see. And it's an iterative process. I mean, they learn eventually. If you keep them long enough, they do learn it's like any employee that's joining a company. They understand the culture that you're trying to create there, and they're able to replicate it. And what's most important from your perspective is that you want the feedback. So if somebody's saying something that you need to know about, you may end up telling that person, yeah, this is what I want to say to them, or you may jump in there yourself and respond to it. But if you can create it, this one of the things I learned very early on with this was I created a Twitter handle for Jessica Ramirez, my protagonist. And she was on Twitter before the book was even out, talking about cop stuff. And I learned so much from the relationships that she developed with people in the business of policing about what their expectations were in the stories. And what they want is they want stuff where they don't have to suspend belief. They want authenticity. They want you to get the technical stuff right.
Okay, but let me just clarify this.
Helpful.
Let me clarify this. Jessica Ramirez is your character in your book, right?
Yes.
Doesn't actually exist as a real person.
She doesn't, but people think she is. I mean, I make it very clear on Twitter that she's fictional, but she's had
wow.
2 marriage proposals.
Oh.
And she's got a huge fan base in Great Britain. For some reason, the UK guys love her. So, of course, the second book, a good portion of the second act takes place in London because that's where a lot of her fans are. So it's an interesting cultural thing about, and when you're an artist, I mean, sometimes you want to, you say it's my brand, it's my music, it's my story. I'm going to write it my way. But part of the magic is this interaction with the people that are actually your consumers, your customers, your readers, and they say, well, what if Jess? Are you going to let Jess marry that FBI guy? Because I like the fact that she keeps putting him off. That's part. You hear that stuff, and you have to take that into account as you're building the character arcs for these folks, so that you are taking the feelings of the people that are your consumers at least into some, kind of account as you're creating. Well, and I think that's hard for some people, but not for me. I love it. I love it when I can do something that just hits that sweet spot that everybody enjoys.
I mean, nothing would please me more than to sit online for hours and just talk to, the people who listen to my show and other musicians and other podcasters and stuff. But I just don't have the time. And maybe delegating that, you got me thinking now, because maybe delegating that out is not the thing I should be delegating. Obviously, I can't have a guest host at this point on my show because that wouldn't do. So, maybe I got to delegate out the editing, because I still do my own editing for the video show and for this show, and then spend more time on this.
Good at that. There are guys that are very good at that will do that for you. It's a whole new industry.
Well, yeah, and also it's not something that needs to be so personalized.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to know if I edited or somebody else did, as long as the show looks right.
Yeah.
So
I mean that's it. I mean, what's your core competency? What do you bring? You bring your personality and your ability to relate to people. When I was in the corporate world, I knew that I tried to make it as easy as possible for the people that were customer facing to do just that. So if they had expense reports they had to file, we automated it. I made sure there were admins that did all that stuff, because I realized that the only time that I was making any money with these people that I was paying a lot of money to was when they were face-to-face with customers. And in our world, both of what you and I do, that is where the magic is. So the kind of stuff you should be thinking about is how to, once a month, you do have somebody set you up on Twitch so that you can spend that hour or two with your people on that platform, or whatever the analog would be for where you think your audience is, so that you can actually have that intimacy with them. It's almost like, after, I remember Kenny Loggins used to do this after his concerts. You could buy a VIP thing if you bought his book or something like that, and come out and sign it and talk to you. And people paid the extra freight for that. I don't know if you're familiar with the group Leonid and Friends. Have you heard about those guys?
No.
They're a Chicago cover band, and if you get a chance on YouTube to look up Leonid and Friends, they basically do note for note covers of Chicago stuff, and they're doing very well. They came through Jacksonville, and we went to see them, and they had a VIP thing afterwards where the entire band came down to the front of the stage, and they took pictures together with every single guest that was there.
Wow.
And we all waited in line. We paid a little extra for that. But, anytime they're within 300 miles of where I am. I'm going to go see them because I feel like I'm part of their family. And that's the trick. If you can figure out how to have, because they had handlers, right, that were lining everybody up. It wasn't them that was doing it. So figure out what it is that your core competency, what's the thing you absolutely have to do. And in the writing world for us, that I think the two things for me is that I've got to create good content, and I have to be out there where my readers are, interacting with them to understand what their feedback is and what they think about the story, the characters, and where they would like to see those people's lives go. Because that's the everything else is something that you could pay somebody to do, and you shouldn't be worrying about it. Because your gift, your incredible gift that you've got to be able to be this fantastic communicator, that's what you should be doing the whole time. You should be able to walk in, sit down, and somebody says, "Okay, you're on, go."
Well, that's, yeah, and that's what I love to do. I mean, that's, if somebody said, what's the best, the thing you love about this business the most, is talking to people. That's it, Everything else is just a tool to get to that point and to, get people to hear me recording. This was another thing that we brought up in that panel discussion, is that I said, podcasting is not an art. I said podcasting, or the podcast itself, isn't an art. It is a medium. It is just a promotional tool. I said there is a certain art to conversation, but the problem is that everybody can talk, but not everybody can do it well. So, there is a certain craft, because you can get better. I mean, and you think of the movies like The King's Speech, where he had that horrible stammer, and then by the end of it, he was doing well with a lot of training and therapy and a guy who was brilliant and believed in him. I don't consider this art, and then, of course, I got, a violent disagreement from this other podcast guy. He says, "This is my creation." I was like, no, it's not. I said, if you paint something, if you write something, music, if you sing something, I said, that's really art. But the art is the creation of something. The podcast is not that. So what I've done, it's a platform. That's all it is. It's no different than a telephone. So what I've done is I've separated that in my head, and I run the video show and the podcast as a business. My music, I can incorporate into that. I use it as the outro of all my shows. Yeah. So when it plays on YouTube, I get 1/4 of a penny for songwriting royalty, and that's fine. I'll do it like that. My music is my art, and that's what satisfies my artistic, passionate pursuit. The podcast, no. This is a business that I enjoy very much. I love it, but it's still a business.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you look at guys like Alice Cooper, I think, was an early adopter in that space with Beck on radio when he was doing that network show, and it was another way for him to interact, and another stage, just another platform.
Exactly.
So figuring out where that audience is and how you talk to them, showing up at the party instead of throwing the party, is the real secret.
So I guess the last question, and then we got to kind of wrap this up, is for somebody who's aspiring to be a writer, where do you start? Do you start by branding your name in the hopes that if you as an individual get famous enough, that all of your work will just sort of follow along on your coattails? Or do you concentrate first on the content and then do your name? Which do you start with, the chicken or the egg? Which way do you go with this?
Yeah, in everything that I've ever tried, Douglas, what I've tried to do first is I've tried to identify who I think are the best practitioners in the world in that space. And I try and learn from them to see what their secret of success is. I try and understand the holistic kind of evolution that took place, how they began, and then what they did to build their brand to the point where their name was bigger than the title of the book. And to see what I can glean from that and make my own. Clearly the content if you don't have good content, we call it the catch-up. The catch-up's got to be there. People have an expectation of a certain level of quality, and so you have to be able to deliver that. But then beyond that, once you get that done, it's how fast you can turn it out, how, consistently good it can be, and then how you can brand it with your particular name. Because over the long haul, that's going to be the thing that endures. When you hear the name Hemingway, you'd love to have the same, when you hear Douglas Coleman, you want to have that same warm feeling that you do when you hear, somebody else that's considered an icon in that business.
Right.
And that's a lifelong pursuit, my friend. It really is. And it's a labor of love if you're in the right place and doing something that's your passion.
Well, I think there's a lot of variables, There is a bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time, connecting with the right people. God only knows about wading through the endless sea of digital shit that's out there. Who knows? I don't think there is a particular formula. We were talking about the Kardashians on that panel discussion, and I said, well, here's a perfect example of marketing 100%, content 0, because they started with nothing other than the father was a lawyer on the O.J. Simpson panel who died about 10 minutes after the trial, after O.J. was acquitted. And so there was a little bit of name recognition there. The mother married Bruce Jenner, a little bit of name recognition there, but hardly enough to consider them, the family, famous in any way. But some PR guy got a hold of that idea and said, oh, well, let's make a reality show about these people. Well, what do? Well, the father was an OJ lawyer and the mother married Bruce Jenner. Oh, like that was enough to sell it to the networks. Yeah. And then once they got the brand of the Kardashian name, they stuck that name on anything they could get their hands on. And that's how they made their money. I mean, you had Kardashian underwear, you had Kardashian handbags, perfume, cosmetics, you name it, they stuck their name on it. And that's really, and now they're billionaires. And then to give them credit, they were very shrewd business people. So once the money started coming in, they invested well, they bought real estate, and they turned it around. But it's my perfect example of how marketing can be you can market nothing. But if you market brilliantly, it'll sell. And I don't know if that's a sad statement on our society or not, that people are so, desperate for any kind of content that if it comes in a pretty package or something, they'll buy it. I don't know. The jury's still out on that idea.
Yeah, I think it's hopeful. It gives people like me at least a belief that if I do things right and have that combination of luck and put the right puzzle pieces together, that some good thing might be able to happen. Why we do it? I don't think so. I think we do it because we love what we do, and we feel like that act of creation is bringing us the joy. And that's why I write. Even if I don't sell another book, I'm going to continue writing because it brings me pleasure.
I could never do what they did because I just feel like I have more personal integrity and self-respect than to just put something out that I know is worthless.
Yeah, right.
I just wouldn't. Yeah,
that's the thing. It's got to have there has to be some purpose to it.
It has to have some value to me first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to please myself first before I do anything else. And then hopefully if other people like it, then so much the better. But, I'm my biggest critic at this point.
And that's the toughest one.
Yeah.
We're always our own worst critic.
Terry, we got to wrap this up. Your book is called Chasing Vega. It is available now, yes?
Yes, available now. TerryShepard.com is the website, and it's available wherever really cool books are sold.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This was a nice conversation. Nice meeting you, and best of luck.
I totally enjoyed it, Douglas. I've been a fan. And one of the things, as I was prepping for this, I got a chance to listen to your work, and I'm so glad that we met. I will continue to be one of those people that supports you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.